Ever played a video game that made you question if it should even exist? From sultry scenes in Mass Effect to the infamous no Russian level in Modern Warfare 2, we're diving into the darkest corners of gaming to bring you the most controversial games of all time. Video games aren't just a pastime, some see them as an art form, and like any art form, they can spark controversies that make headlines and divide opinions faster than a Mortal Kombat fatality move. They have this incredible ability to immerse us in worlds and stories that some mediums just can't match, but with such immersion comes a whole lot of scrutiny, especially when game devs push boundaries of what's considered acceptable. Mass Effect, a space opera of sorts that captured our hearts, minds, and well, let's just say other interests. Now, if you're a fan, you probably already know this game is chock full of choices: moral, strategic, and romantic ones. But way back in 2007, Mass Effect took a quantum leap that had conservative media channels buzzing louder than the vibrations on an Xbox 360 controller. I'm talking about the so-called lewd scenes of the game. No, it's not what you're thinking. Well, actually it kind of is. You see, Mass Effect allowed you to forge relationships, some of which could become slightly a little too intimate for a video game. And while these scenes are tame by today's standards, let's be honest, Game of Thrones probably showed us way more. The outcry though back then was massive. Critics claimed the game was promoting digital debauchery. But here's the thing, Mass Effect wasn't just about those scenes, it was an expansive universe filled with meaningful choices that affected your story's outcome. Yeah, what got the spotlight? A few intimate moments between you and, well, some aliens in some cases. Kind of understandable now, right? It struck such a nerve because it was one of the first mainstream games to bring romance to the forefront in a way that kind of felt a little bit weird and, dare I say, semi-human. It made people question the boundaries of interactive storytelling, and for that reason alone, it's infamous enough to deserve a spot on this list of the most controversial games of all time.
They say all work and no play makes Johnny a dull boy.
It's three-dimensional. It's texture map. It's Wolfenstein, one of the hottest-selling computer games in the world, in which B.J. Blazkowicz storms a Nazi bunker in search of Adolf Hitler. The game is the creation of John Romero and 5 other computer whizzes who comprise a company called id Software. One of the reasons for Wolfenstein's success is texture mapping, a technique for giving surfaces realistic texture. That quality did not come easily. It is achieved by clever programs which squeeze the most out of a computer's components. Despite the frivolity at id, it's a lot of 16-hour days by programmers, artists, and designers that make the game successful. And the place does have the magic of a successful enterprise. Work and play here are the same thing.
What about a game now that hits much closer to home, or should I say history? Enter Wolfenstein 3D, the game that said, let's give players guns and just set them loose in a Wehrmacht-controlled World War II fortress. Now, you'd think this would be an easy win, right? Who doesn't want to fight against the bad guys? Well, turns out not everyone was on board. Of course, Germany, who said, yeah, 9. To this day, the original game remains banned in Germany, along with some other titles that are banned or censored like Call of Duty 5. But it's easy to see why. From the iconography and the flags decorating the walls to a pixelated Führer as the game's final boss, it's obvious why Germany didn't want anything to do with this one, and Wolfenstein 3D was very blunt and never shy about its setting. But let's be clear, the game's graphics were so rudimentary that no one would mistake it for a history lesson. We're talking about a game where the German army were basically as pixelated as Minecraft blocks. But this game made us confront the ugliness of history within the context of entertainment. Is it okay to reduce real-life atrocities to video games? That's a question some still grapple with, even as tech evolves to produce even more realistic portrayals of historical events. And some say it's merely a preservation of history. You decide.
A fantasy martial arts game, as some parents think is just too violent for their kids. Carol Lynn joins us live now from Northridge with more on that story. Carol?
Here it is, Bob, behind me. It's called Mortal Kombat, and we're going to talk to Aaron Brandis here about the game. Aaron, how does it work?
Well, basically, you pick a couple characters, you do maneuvers on the joysticks and buttons, you do moves, and
then what are you trying to get to? The fatality?
Nah, there's a master guy you got to beat at the end. Fatalities are just what happens if you're really brutal to your opponent. You get an opponent, you can rip off his head or something like that.
Sounds like a pretty thrilling game, and this is the kind of violence that critics are pretty worried about. Cold-blooded murder is making Mortal Kombat the most popular video game in history. Kids relish their victory and their bloody choice. Should they pull out their opponent's heart? Or simply rip his head off just to see his spinal cord dangle in a pool of blood? How do you feel about cutting his head off? After a $10 million advertising campaign, Mortal Kombat, debuting in home video today, is expected to sell 2 million copies at $50 a pop. A horrifying possibility for parents who can't believe the game makers are fantasizing about decapitation and murder.
I don't think they'll have this at home, no.
You don't think so?
A little bit too violent.
You look a little startled.
Yeah, it's a little too violent, I think.
That's pretty bad, and that's just plain gross.
Furthermore, advanced technology allows digitized video of real martial arts actors, making the action look real and not as cartoony. In fact, Mortal Kombat so shocked the managers at a nationwide arcade chain that they tried a sanitized version of the game. Instead of chopping the opponent's head off, he simply disappears. Sales dropped 40%.
They came up and said, what'd you do to the game? It's no fun anymore.
Kids are saying chill out to worried parents.
I think TV personally influences more than a video game. A video game is a video game.
The bottom line, parents wonder if kids can separate fantasy from the real thing.
Wait until they get out in a situation where they're fighting, and then they'll think about this and try to make it real.
Mortal Kombat, the franchise that turned finish him into a household phrase and parental concern into a full-blown political circus. This game didn't just push the envelope, it tore the whole thing apart and then set it on fire. Imagine, if you will, a more innocent time, a time when video games were mostly about saving princesses or eating up dots. But then comes Mortal Kombat, a fighting game where you could quite literally rip someone's spine out, and just like that, everything totally changes. Now, it wasn't just that Mortal Kombat was somewhat violent, it was more so that the violence was so detailed, so glorified, and let's admit it, kind of satisfying. This was no pixelated shootout, this was an orchestrated dance of absolute carnage that ended in bone-chilling fatalities. You know, you're pushing the boundaries when Congress steps in and they say, maybe we need some rules for this. Yep, Mortal Kombat is so infamous, it led to the creation of what's known as the ESRB, which is basically the rating system that judges whether a game is E for everyone or M for mum please don't look, aka mature.
First, we have Mortal Kombat, which is a martial arts contest involving digitized characters. We're going to show two versions of the game. In the first segment, which is Sega's version, blood splatters from the contestants' heads. When a player wins, the so-called death sequence begins. The game narrator instructs the player to finish, and I quote, finish his opponent. The player may then choose a method of murder, ranging from ripping a heart out to pulling off the head of the opponent with spinal cord attached. The second version, made by Nintendo, leaves out the blood and decapitation, but as you will see, it is still a violent game. For a lot of you to see, but there's blood splattering every time.
Kato wins. Flawless victor fatality. Excellent. Finish him. Sub-Zero win. Fatality.
And this is a brief sequence from the Nintendo version. Now, the difference there, as you can see, is that that version does not have the finishing sequences, the death sequences, and in fact, instead of red blood spurting out, there's some other liquid, but it doesn't look like blood.
But despite, maybe because of, the controversy, Mortal Kombat has become absolutely iconic, and it asks us a challenging question. Where do we draw the line between artistic freedom of expression and responsibility? Can a game be an absolute masterpiece and a mortal quandary? Mortal Kombat didn't just change the game, it changed the conversation around games, and it was one of those ones that was super controversial back in a more conservative time, and that's why it's earned its glorious spot on this list. Now, if Mortal Kombat is a symphony of violence, then Manhunt is a rock concert with mosh pits filled with broken glass. Created by Rockstar North, the same folks behind Grand Theft Auto, Manhunt throws you into a nightmarish world where you're forced to commit acts of violence to survive. Basically a snuff film brought to life in a video game. And I'm not making this up, the game actually gives you style points for the level of gruesomeness you bring to kills. Needless to say, of course, it didn't really sit well with almost everyone back then. New Zealand banned it outright, the UK nearly followed suit with the ban, and US stores just pulled it from shelves. Parents, politicians, and even some players said Rockstar had just gone way too far with this one. So what's the big deal? Here's where things get slightly complicated. On one hand, Manhunt is undeniably brutal and also borderline sadistic, but on the other hand, it's completely just a work of fiction. It's a game that challenges our notions of mortality and taste within the medium of gaming. Whether it's a disturbing masterpiece or a tasteless gore fest is a matter of perspective. But what it did undeniably do was spark up a debate about the very nature of games and their role in society. Could a game be too violent? Should there be limits? This is definitely one of those games that forces us to confront some uncomfortable questions. And of course, the debate about video games causing violence was definitely fuel for this fire.
Remember, no Russian.
None of these though are as controversial as the no Russian level in Modern Warfare 2. This mission didn't just push the envelope, it absolutely incinerated it. Picture this, you're an undercover CIA agent infiltrating a group of criminals. Your mission is simple but also morally devastating. Participate in an airport catastrophe in order to not blow your cover. The level, although thankfully optional, allowed you to pull the trigger on some undeserving targets, and it was as horrifying as it sounds. The mission didn't come without a trigger warning, of course, and you could just gloss over it with a skip button, but it sparked a debate that reached mainstream media and the internet. Everyone had an opinion of this. Some argued it was just a tasteless addition which was unnecessary to the narrative of the game, whilst others claimed it was just a bold form of storytelling, forcing players to grapple with the moral complexities of real modern warfare.
A popular new video game actually allows you to be a terrorist and kill people. The controversial new video game is called Modern Warfare 2, and it is flying off the shelves. But is this fantasy game just a little too real? And is it appropriate?
Certain forms of video game violence can be correlated to aggression in the kids who use them. So it's really a question of the age of the user.
Is it ever appropriate to assimilate killing people?
There's no question that there's a correlation between video and game violence and screen violence and aggression in real life. The American Academy of Pediatrics just came out with a statement about that. So it really is a call on the basis of the user, and in the case of someone who's a parent of a teenager, which is this game's at, is it okay or not? The violence is the issue, and that's the call that you have to make, and you need to use common sense in terms of using games like that.
The controversy even led to the game being pulled from some store shelves in Russia and triggered investigations by government bodies in other countries. Yet for all the outreach, it still is one of the most infamous moments in gaming history. And of course, if you go play the game, the level is still there. Why? Because it made everyone very uncomfortable. It kind of blurred the line between player and participant, and it kind of made people ask, if this is wrong, why are people playing it, and what does that say about them? You thought we were done stirring the pot? We're just getting started.
A new game that encourages kids to kill priests and blow up animals. The night team with the controversy over this vicious video game.
What went wrong? For some, the answer might be the game itself. It is called Postal, a software offering already being hailed as a hit even before its scheduled September release. To anyone unfamiliar with computer software games, the blood and the mayhem of Postal could be a shock. But to the software programmers who make up much of this audience, the violence is appealing.
Just something about being able to take your friend, blow his head off. It's mass mayhem.
I get under a lot of stress at work, and it's just kind of nice to go home and just get it out that way, and then I'm okay for the rest of the night.
The term going postal is the newest entry into the English lexicon for getting angry, really angry. But it grew out of a series of random, violent shootings at U.S. post offices by disgruntled employees who took out their bosses and their girlfriends in a mad rage. That legacy seeps into this game through its name.
The makers of this game say they're going to be very careful and market it for mature audiences only. Just how mature is anyone's guess.
Buckle up because we're diving headfirst now into the outrageous world of Postal 2. It's a game that proudly wears its badge of controversy, which is well earned. Now you might be thinking, how bad can it really be? You have no idea. In Postal 2 you can engage in a whole host of depravity, from urinating on people to using cats as gun silencers. Yeah, you heard that right. Whilst the game received criticism for its gratuitous violence, it also raised questions about the boundaries of satire in gaming. Is Postal 2 a mirror held up to society's darkest corners, or is it just an excuse to indulge people's most twisted fantasies? This game is kind of like a fever dream, and it's so satisfying to play, but it's also extremely messed up. And from the time it was actually released in, you can tell why it caused a stir. Either way though, you can be sure it definitely got people talking and debating, which could have been the whole point all along, because at the end of the day, whether you love it or hate it, Postal 2 forces you to have an opinion, and it's a game which refuses to be ignored.
Why not right here? Okay.
Now we're turning back the clock back to a time when pixels was slightly more risque and computer games came on floppy disks. Ah, the 80s. But fast forward a little bit, because one game from this era still manages to stir up controversy today, and it's called Leisure Suit Larry. The game Leisure Suit Larry Magna Cum Laude was certainly fuel for controversy. In this newer and more later iteration of the series, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree here either, as you play as Larry Lavage, a nephew of the game's original character. This time you're navigating the social maze of college life, trying to, let's say, score in more ways than one. Much like its predecessors though, Magna Cum Laude was hit with a barrage of criticism. Accusations of objectifying women and promoting more harmful stereotypes were once again at the forefront of this game. Remember, this one came during a perfect time when American college films of the early 2000s, like American Pie, were at the height of popularity, so it kind of came in the times with everything released during this era. Some argue, of course, that this game is just entirely satirical, which just pokes fun at the often cringeworthy experience that comes with youth and the college experience. And of course, the main character isn't really your typical hero, so maybe that's the whole point, and that's also why the game is just hilarious. Set in one of the deadliest battles of the Iraq War, 6 Days in Fallujah sparked a firestorm long before it finally released. Its detractors argue that turning real recent tragedies into a video game was highly insensitive, to say the least. On the flip side, the game developers insist their aim is to present an unvarnished look at the complexities of urban warfare, honouring those that fought in it. But therein lies the question, can a video game truly do justice to such a grave and nuanced subject, especially one in which many innocent lives were lost on both sides of the coin, and for those who do not support war like me, it can be a polarising debate. The debate rages on, but it forced us to confront what we're comfortable with, as it challenged the line between entertainment and exploitation, which made it a pretty controversial title even before it dropped on Steam. Now this one isn't your typical cops and robbers scenario. 25 to Life gave you the option to play as either a police officer or a gangster. Sounds pretty straightforward, right? Well, kinda wrong. The game drew heavy criticism for allegedly glamorizing gang culture and criminal activity. Lawmakers and activists were up in arms about this game, calling for the game to be banned. They argued it was a negative influence, especially for young people vulnerable to the allure of gang life culture. But here's the kicker, because whilst the game was shrouded in all this controversy, it didn't exactly receive standing ovations for gameplay or quality either, which in itself is a lesson that the controversy alone also can't make a game great, but it can sure make it memorable. Ah yes, the game that combines the excitement of volleyball with atomically exaggerated characters. The game's voluptuous portrayal of women definitely had heads turning, and it's definitely still a controversial title to this day, and definitely not in a good way. I'm sure if you played the consoles of old, you'll remember the big controversy which came from the Dead or Alive series, particularly the Xtreme beach volleyball games. Now you've probably seen these on those tennis covers or in demo discs or short ads in the past, and this was a game or game franchise that critics called out for its blatant objectification, arguing that it perpetuated harmful stereotypes. The controversy was so heated it even sparked debates over ethics of the video game designs itself, and also a lot of the skins and characters from these games were banned for use in tournaments because of it. But here's the twist, for all its controversial content and history, the game also boasts a surprisingly loyal fan base, and like I said, yeah, there were tournaments. This is a really competitive game. Some argue that it's just harmless fun, and that like other games games on this list really isn't meant to be taken so seriously. And in terms of comparison of everything else which got released in times after it, I'd say it's pretty PG. We've delved into the seedy, the brutal, the uncomfortable, and the just plain weird, all to unearth the most controversial games to ever grace our screens. The world of gaming isn't just about high scores and boss battles, it's sometimes a cultural battlefield where lines are drawn and crossed every day. If you've got any thoughts, stories, or controversial takes on any of these games, drop them in the comments below, because I want to hear all about your opinions on them, and if you actually played any of these games when they were released. And also smash the like button right now, because you don't want to miss what's coming next, because the next upload is going to be a banger, and if we get enough likes, I'll drop it. So make sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss out.